Hello and welcome. My name is Lexi and today we're taking a look at the new Chanel Oversized Eye and Cheek palette. And I picked up one of the two palettes. These are from the spring collection. They are limited edition and this is number 957 Tendresse. And these are made in Italy. You have an 18-month shelf life and you have 12 grams of product. So it's definitely pretty large here. So this comes packaged, just in a Chanel box. There's no sleeve or envelope for this. When you open this up, you do have just a little reminder essentially that this is for both eyes and cheeks. You have a little plastic piece to cover it up so you don't get dust on the mirror like I did. And then this is Tendresse. So as you can see, I have already used it and I want you to notice, look at how the light hits the pans here. So I did do finger swipes, but I did remove those, and this texture that's on here now is specifically from using it with brushes. So I just want to show that to you right off the bat because this does make me wonder if this is a palette that's going to get hard pan pretty quickly. So I will have an update on this in a later video if that develops. But yeah, just the fact that you can see, particularly in some of these, how it gets a little bit shinier in the middle. It just looks like there's going to be hard pan developing. Right now, everything is functioning totally well. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about this. So right now I'm showing you eye swatches and cheek swatches of all four of the shades separately. So you can see how they go on. You can see the texture of these. These are a very creamy texture with a little bit of like grip to them. So they do feel like they are gripping onto the skin, like they're going to stay there well. As a matter of fact, when you are looking at the blush demos, it actually seems a little bit more challenging to get the product on the blush brushes when you're using a fluffier brush than it does something more dense. And again, I think that's just because of the particular texture of this. Everything goes on very nicely. And I think that the products themselves, they blend out beautifully. They stay on very well throughout the day. They're very, very gorgeous products. Now this palette, and again, there are two of these palettes in the collection. I wasn't really interested in any other items from this collection, so this is all I picked up from spring. However, very interested in the LeBlanc collection, which will be coming up fairly soon. So this particular palette, we have 4 shades, and on the right side of the palette, the top right, we have kind of that like lighter peachier shade. That one really has more of a sheen. It's essentially your highlighter shade in this palette. And then right below that, we have something a bit more brown. You can use that as more of a, a bronzer type product. It's not quite deep enough for a contour or for a bronzer, but it can kind of be used to give you a little bit more depth with some of these shades. The other shades in here, we have something that's a little bit more plum based, and then we have a true peach. And we're going to look at each of these on arm swatches as well, but you can see that they all have a little bit of a sheen to them. So when you buff those into the skin, as we're doing on the cheeks, you can really see some of that sheen pull through when you're putting it on the eyes. If you're using something a little fluffier and dusting it on, you might not see as much of that sheen. You can get it to look more matte, but this will never be a flat matte, nor will it be a full satin. It is a true satin matte product, but if you buff enough product in, you can get a decent amount of a sheen, particularly with the second shade, the highlighter shade. That's obviously going to have a higher sheen than any of the other shades in this palette. Now I'm also showing you my demo for today's look, and I combined a few different, of the shades on my eyes. I use fingers and brushes so you can kind of see how they apply. When you apply them to the eyes with the finger, you can feel the creaminess when you go ahead and swatch it. And when you put it on the lid, you really feel a bit more grip. If you've tried the Jones Road, the best eyeshadow products, those will be the most similar in texture. However, those are going to be a little bit more, they don't have as much of that creamy texture to them, but that grip that you feel when it's going on is more similar. So that's the only product I can really think of that has quite that same texture when you run it over your lid. So as you can see, all of these shades work together very well. You can get a very cohesive eye look, and obviously they all work very well on the cheeks as well. Now, when we did do the blush swatches, I built those up to full impact you know, by request. So that way, you know, depending on your skin tone, you can see how deeply you can build these up. It's going to be about the level that you get from a finger swatch, but slightly softer in pigmentation than that if you're going to, you know, want to smooth out your edges and so forth. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the arm swatches. So we're going to look at these, and then we're also going to do some comparisons with some other Chanel products here. And we're just going to go, you know, kind of clockwise. So while I am doing a finger swatch here, you can actually, when you're actually swiping your finger along it, you can feel a bit of that texture, that grip, as the product actually goes onto your finger. It's really an interesting texture. I really like it, and it's one of those things that I really like about those Jones Road shadows. You know, but it just has a really nice texture, and as you're going onto the arm, you can see, I mean, look how creamy this looks. Even this highlighter shade is creamy. Now the highlighter shade here does have a little bit more, it's hard to say, you know, it's not like it's less creamy per se, but you can definitely feel that there is a higher concentration of like metallic particles in it. So you can feel a little bit more particulate matter in there. So it's not quite as smooth as the others. And then this last shade here, you know, this is going to be kind of your brown, but look at this brown because it really has more of a peachy base to it. I mean, look at when you actually smooth this out at the edges there, you can see you have kind of like a golden peach hue to it. So this whole palette itself is warm. This shade here is almost like a brick burgundy, but it's definitely going to be a warm tone burgundy and not a cool tone. Then we have this peachy highlight shade, and this is going to be like a true peach mixed with kind of like a cantaloupe orange. And then this brown, you know, it's really kind of like a medium tan color mixed with peach. There's definitely peach in the base notes of this. So everything here is going to run overall pretty warm. The peachy tones really makes it work well on the cheeks. Now, I do want to state that the new creative team that was just recently announced by Chanel did not create this collection. As a matter of fact, they did not create anything that will be seen this year from customers. So we won't see their new creations until 2024. And I did verify that with, you know, somebody at Chanel. So that is going to be accurate. This was done by a creative team, but it is not by that creative team. So I am very excited to see what the new team will have in store for us next year, but I just wanted to share because I have heard some rumors that the new team have designed some of these new collections coming up, and I did want to get that information clarified. So I did some research, contacted some people, and eventually got a response. And this collection was done by a creative team, but it is not the new official creative team there. This is the team that has been in place since Lucia Pica left. So we're going to take a look at some Chanel products. And the first product I want to look at, this is one of last year's blushes. This is Peche Rosé from the Blush Lumiere line of Chanel. This came out last year for, I believe this was their spring collection. And this was made in France. Note that the new palette is made in Italy, so just something to note there. But this is a highlighting blush, and I wanted to put this here because look how similar that is. Doesn't it really look like a cross between these two shades here? This definitely has a bit of shimmer in it. When you kind of buff that into your skin, it's going to have just a little bit more sheen than these more matte shades, but not quite as much as this highlighting shade. So this is Peche Rosé. So Peche Rosé is just slightly more orange than the ones in this new palette. I also wanted to take a look at the Chanel blush in 80 Jersey. And I just wanted to show you how this compares to the very last shade here. And we're just gonna put that right there. You can see that Jersey is gonna be much more pink. Now this is the old formula of Jersey. When they redesigned the blushes, I did not pick up a new version of Jersey, but all of the newer ones are slightly warmer in tone. So if you have a newer version of Jersey, it's probably slightly warmer and less rosy than mine. Now, before we move on to the eyeshadow swatches, I just want to talk about these textures a little bit. So these blush textures are different. The original Chanel blush formula, they were a little bit more of a powdery texture compared to the Blush Lumiere. The Blush Lumiere texture is actually very similar to the ones in this Cheek and Eye palette. However, there's a little bit more grip to this new palette, and the Blush Lumiere has a little bit more powder. It's more like creamy, like a creamy texture with a little bit more powder, whereas this is a little bit of a creamy texture with a little bit more grip, like adherence to it. So just something slightly different there, but this original blush formula is going to be very different. It's definitely going to have a more powdery texture than either of those. Let's look at some eyeshadows as well. Now, the first color story that Tendresse really made me think of is 354 Warm Memories. So I want to swatch this palette and show you how these compare. Now, this eyeshadow texture is going to be softer, more powdery. It's a creamy, powdery texture, but you know, I have to say I do like this eyeshadow formula in this palette. So you can see over here, we've definitely got more of those mauve tone shades. These are going to have more of a brown hue than the burgundy here, and the contour-ish shade here is definitely going to be a lot more yellow. But you can see that this peachy shade is kind of similar to those. So let's take a look at these two with that, just so you can see how they compare. So just going to put those right here next to it. And you can see that Warm Memories, this one's going to be more orange. There's a little bit more pink in comparison with this highlighter shade. And this is just going to be kind of like dustier and a little bit deeper in coloration. Now, another palette I wanted to compare, this is 364 Candeur et Séduction. And I wanted to take a look at kind of these two shades here and see how they compare to the deepest shade in this Cheek and Eye palette. So here are those shades. Let's just put those right at the top. You can see this first shade here is going to have a lot more purple, more plum in it, but look how close these are. So we've got more of a brick tone to the Cheek and Eye palette. This still has just a little bit more red in it, whereas this has a little bit more brown, but they are kind of close. And then another shade, I wanted to compare this peachy shade here at the bottom with the peachier shades in this palette. This here is the Tweed Fauve palette that came out this year. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this right here underneath those two shades from the palette. And you can see this is actually pretty close to that in Warm Memories. So it's going to be a little bit more orange than the Tendresse shades. And my last comparison, this is the Dior 889 Reflexion palette from this fall. I just want to compare this kind of red shade here, this orange shade, and this brown shade. Well, you know what? While we're at it, let's just swatch the whole palette. So we can see we've got much deeper shades overall here. And then our highlight shade in this palette is going to be more like a tan. And you can see that overall, although this is kind of like a dusty mauve, it's not going to match, this palette really doesn't match anything in here. This is going to be a lot lighter and peachier. Everything here is going to be more brown and red. So it is time for my final thoughts. I have to say that overall, I really like the concept of this palette. I love the idea of having, this cheek palette that, has the staying power of, eyeshadows. There's a little extra grip in this formula, which I think is really nice. They go on well. Everything's held up well so far. However, I am worried that this palette will develop hard pan in the future, just based on what I'm seeing. So I'm going to clean off all of the oils that I got on this palette from doing finger swatches, and I will leave an update on this palette when I do my February repurchase review at the end of the month. I'll be testing this throughout this month to see whether or not it does develop hard pan or if I notice any signs. So, I'll definitely update you guys on that as soon as, if I notice anything. And if I don't, then that's so much the better. Overall, for me, I personally don't typically like blush shades on my eyes. It's just not my personal, color preference with my complexion. But I love the concept of having the blush and the eyeshadow palette. The color story for this palette and the other story though are both very warm. I'm very happy that they have two palettes, one's deeper, one's lighter. However, they're both very warm, and I would have loved to see, even if we do have, maybe like a mix of warm and cool tones in here. I feel like it would not have been hard to make this deepest shade here a little bit cooler, or something in here just a little bit cooler. Everything runs very warm and it's very cohesive that way, but I do think that it's nice to kind of have a mix of different undertones in here. Now, one other thing to note, this palette does retail for $90 US. And if you have any of the other like eyeshadow palettes I showed, it might be just a better option to just utilize some of these shadows as blush instead of going out and buying the oversized palette. Obviously, your blush brush will fit better in this, but if it's not something you're going to use all the time, it might be better just kind of test it out with one of your eyeshadow palettes first and see how often you would use something like that. I would have to say my overall opinion of this is it's okay. I like the concept, but I'm not thrilled with the color selections that they offered here. And I am a little bit worried about this formula long term. So we'll see. But I'm very happy to see that Chanel is trying new things. And again, I really can't wait to see what the very new creative team is going to do next year. Very excited for that. And of course, the next collection coming up from Chanel is the LeBlanc or Brightening collection. And that, I'm very excited for that particular color story and actually all of the products in there. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this is helpful. And if you have tried these, I'd love to know what your thoughts are and what you think. So one last thing to know, this palette and the whole collection is available currently at Chanel boutiques. It is not available online yet until the end of the month, somewhere around March 1st, unless they end up moving up that date, which Chanel has been prone to do in certain circumstances. So as of right now, if you are looking to purchase these, you do want to contact the boutique. I ordered from the Aventura Boutique in Miami, and I will leave Paloma and Jelissa's contact information down below. And yeah, definitely support them. Let them know that I sent you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you very soon.